Back in 1987, four guys from Queens showed up to the thrash metal party wearing surf shorts, singing about Judge Dredd and Stephen King novels, and somehow made one of the most aggressive, punishing records the genre had ever produced. No pentagrams, no leather and chains aesthetic, just comic books, horror paperbacks, and an absolute refusal to be told what heavy metal was supposed to look like. That record was Among the Living, and if you ever wondered how Anthrax went from being a respected underground band to one of the big four of thrash metal, stick around because that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let's rewind to early 1986. Spreading the Disease had just come out a year before and done serious work for the band. They toured behind it, they opened for Black Sabbath, they landed on the radar of a lot of metal fans who were starting to pay attention to what was coming out of New York. The lineup had finally stabilized. Joey Belladonna on vocals, Dan Spitz on lead guitar, Frank Bello on bass, Scott Ian and Charlie Benante locking in as a creative core of the band. They had momentum, they had confidence, they had a very clear vision of what the next record needed to be. What a lot of people don't realize is that the songwriting process for Among the Living was almost backwards from what you'd expect. Charlie Benante, the drummer, was actually the primary riff writer. He was generating most of the guitar skeletons, the structural frameworks of the songs, and then handing those off to Scott Ian to arrange and flesh out. Ian, meanwhile, was focused almost entirely on lyrics, rapid-fire, rhythmically aggressive words that could keep up with Benante's blistering tempos. And then the two of them would work with Joey Belladonna to shape where the melodies were going to sit. Scott Ian described the rhythm guitar approach during this period as almost robotic, what he called fascistic guitar playing, pure mechanical downstrokes, no flash, no deviation, just locked in, machine gun precision that created a wall of sound underneath Dan Spitz's leads. One of the reasons the rhythm tracks on this record feel so relentless, there's nowhere to breathe. Most of the album came together in a furious, concentrated burst during July 1986. The band rented rehearsal time at Top Cat Studios in New York City. No frills, just a sweat-soaked room, a stack of pizza boxes, and a shared obsession with getting these songs right. But a couple of the album's most iconic tracks had actually been in the pipeline much longer than that. I Am the Law and Indians were both written during the Spreading the Disease tour and had been road tested at sound checks and dropped into live sets well before the band ever thought about the studio. By the time recording came around, those songs were battle-hardened. Now let's talk about what's exactly in the record, because the song selection here is one of the things that makes Among the Living stand out from everything else being made in 1987. The title track and A Skeleton in the Closet are both direct adaptations of Stephen King. Among the Living draws from The Stand, specifically the villain Randall Flagg, The Walking Dude, and A Skeleton in the Closet is based on the novella Apt Pupil. I Am the Law is a full-on tribute to Judge Dredd, the British comic book character from 2000 AD. Caught in a Mosh came from a road crew complaint. One of the roadies was complaining backstage about accidentally ending up in a pit during a show, and that mundane, almost funny moment turned into one of the album's most iconic cuts. And then there is Ethel Nickel Fessin, which, as you probably already figured out, is Nice Effing Life spelled backwards. The band wrote a song about substance abuse, specifically the death of comedian John Belushi, but they knew that putting those words in an actual song title would immediately get them pulled from radio and store shelves, so they reversed it, spelled it phonetically, and the label and radio stations completely missed the joke. Scott Ian later talked about how during the promotional cycle, mainstream journalists kept asking why the band had written a heavy metal song about the NFL. He found that hilarious. Horror of It All is worth talking about because of the story behind it. It was the last track written for the album. It was a tribute to Cliff Burton, Metallica's bassist, who died in a bus accident in Sweden in September 1986 while Anthrax was touring Europe with them. The band witnessed the aftermath of that firsthand. It left a mark. The track is as close to a ballad as the album gets, and now you know why. The recording itself was not a smooth ride. Anthrax has hired Eddie Kramer, a legitimate legend, the guy who produced Kiss Alive and worked extensively with Led Zeppelin, because they thought he'd be able to capture that raw, explosive live sound. What they got instead was somebody who showed up at the Miami studio aiming to make a polished commercial rock record. Kramer started drenching Belladonna's vocals in stadium reverb. He started going for the kind of slick, wide-open production you heard on Def Leppard's Pyromania, and Anthrax absolutely lost it. Scott Ian confronted Kramer directly. The arguments got tense. Ian reportedly told him to throw the effects pedals in the ocean. The band wanted to record the sound like standing in the middle of their top-cot rehearsing room. Dry, aggressive, punchy, immediate, no distance, no gloss. And in the end, that conflict actually pushed the performances harder, because the band was angry throughout the sessions, and that anger is all over the final product. When it came to promoting Among the Living, Anthrax made a deliberate choice to walk away from the scripted concept video format. They had a bad experience with Madhouse, the video from Spreading the Disease, which MTV had actually banned for being insensitive. That left a sour taste. So for this cycle, they went almost entirely with live performance footage. The primary video for Indians was assembled from tour footage. No sets, no narrative, no costumes, just a band on stage, Scott Ian in his oversized surf shorts, and a sea of bodies in the mosh pit. It became a cornerstone of Headbangers Ball, and rather than doing individual concert videos for the rest of the album, they filmed a full concert at the Hammersmith Odeon in London on November 16, 1987. That became Oid Nifl Festin. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but that's a backwards NFV for Nice Effing Video, which was released in 1988 and gave the album's biggest tracks their definitive visual representations. Caught in a Mosh, I'm the Law, Among the Living, all captured live and raw exactly the way they wanted. So what did all of this actually do for the band? It changed everything. They went from theaters to arenas. They headlined US tours with Exodus and Metal Church as support. They co-headlined European tours with Metallica. Indians on Headbangers Ball introduced them to mainstream rock audience that found most thrash too dark or too grim to engage with. Anthrax offered something different. High energy, self-aware, genuinely fun, without sacrificing any of the aggression. The album went gold in the United States in 1987. Playing music that fast, that's remarkable. And there's a door that opened during this era that nobody fully appreciated in real time. On the I Am the Law video, Scott Ian wore a Public Enemy t-shirt. It wasn't a stunt. They genuinely liked what was happening in New York in hip-hop, but Chuck D noticed that relationship seated right here during the Among the Living cycle was eventually produced Bring the Noise in 1991, and I'll be doing a video on that later, but Anthrax and Public Enemy had a collaboration, and depending on who you asked, that kind of started the firing gun of the entire rap metal era, including an EP which will be the video after this. But in the meantime, Among the Living didn't just make Anthrax a bigger band, it gave them a new identity. While Metallica had Master of Puppets, Slayer had Rain and Blood, Anthrax had this, the record that proved they could be the heaviest thing in the room and still find room to be funny, weird, and human. That's the niche they carved, and nobody has been able to fill it since. Now, I'll be honest with you, as big as Among the Living was, what happened right after might actually be more interesting, because Anthrax followed one of the most intense thrash metal records of the decade with something almost nobody expected. They recorded a rap song, and not in a way that embarrassed anyone. Next time, we're going to talk about the I Am the Man EP, what it was, why they did it, and then why it matters a lot more than people give it credit for. Don't miss that one. Check out this playlist, The Story of Anthrax. I think this is the 4th video. I did their first album. I did Spreading the Disease. I did one on SOD, because that's kind of part of the Anthrax history. And now Among the Living, this is episode 4. So check it out, like, subscribe. See you in the next one.